A few weeks ago, before the official release of the Asia Circuit set in Cardfight Vanguard Zero, I made a video talking about what I predicted to be the best decks for the set 5 meta based on what all the new cards do, their general strengths and weaknesses, as well as their overall matchup spread. I then take that information and couple it with what I know was already performing really well in the set 4 meta, and I give you guys a prediction of what the best decks are going to be. Well, in today's video, I'm going to do an actual tier list of every single archetype that exists in Cardfight Vanguard, not just the ones that I perceive to be the best ones, but every single one, so that way you guys can have a better idea as to where every deck you might want to try out places. So when the next season starts this Wednesday, you'll have a good idea of maybe what to build for if you haven't built it already, or what to keep playing with, so that way you can just coast and get all the packs you need for the foreseeable future for when new clans come out next month. I want to stress before we get into the actual tier list that this is just my opinion based off of years of experience in competitive card games, as well as analyzing and playing plenty of ranked matches right now in the current Cardfight Vanguard Zero meta. In a game like Vanguard, where there's so much variance game to game to game, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. So please do not post in my comment section, but I triple critted with Bermuda Triangle and won a game. Good for you. That's not what this list is about. Those kind of games I do not take into account when looking at this list. Okay? Great. If you guys are excited and want to see more videos like this from me in the future, please be sure to let me know that by leaving a like on this video, subscribing to the channel, and clicking that bell for notifications, so that way you guys know when my videos go live for you. Also, if this video sparks anything within you and you want to discuss with me further what the best decks are in Cardfight Vanguard Zero, please be sure to follow me over on Twitch. I go live every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Links to that down below. I spend a lot of time in just chatting, and trust me, we chat a lot about Vanguard and card games. So if you ever have a question, feel free to come over there. Hopefully I can give you some answers. But yeah guys, with all that being said, let's go ahead and make this tier list. Alright guys, here we are in my tier list template. If you guys want to go ahead and give making your own tier list a try, I'll go ahead and leave a link to this template down below. Feel free to share your tier list with me via Twitter, Instagram, Discord, whatever, and we can totally have a discussion about it. I would love to see what you guys think of this format. But before I get into the nitty-gritty of analyzing these 22 different decks, I want to quickly brief you guys on the way my mind thinks when it comes to ranking a tier list. The two main factors that I take into account is power and popularity, the two P's. Basically, power I define by what the deck can do. Its combos, its combo potential, its ability to create pressure, advantage, etc. These are all factors in how good a deck is, but not necessarily how meta a deck is. The meta aspect of a deck, meaning tier 1, tier 1.5, tier 2, tier 3, refers to how popular I believe or I've experienced it to be. So those are the two main factors that I will take into account. If you see a deck within like the same tier as another one, but like one's higher than the other, most of the time that is due to the other deck being just a little bit more popular than the other one, and that has various factors. Ease of access, so like a cheaper deck is more popular than a more expensive deck because it's easier to get. Just like clans, certain clans are just inherently more popular than others, and that just has to do with like people's preferences and stuff. The point I'm trying to make here is that very rarely is a deck sort of higher on the list when it's just more powerful. Anytime that happens, I will reference it, but if I don't reference it, that means the deck, in my opinion, is perceived to be more popular. And that's the only reason one deck is, say, higher than another one within a given tier. Also, we have 4 tiers for this video. We have tier 1, which are like the best decks, the most popular ones. We have tier 1.5, Fringe. This basically means that these decks would be tier 1 if the other decks didn't exist in the tier 1 bracket. A good example of a tier 1.5 deck that I'll get to in a bit is, say, Perfect Razor. Perfect Razor has all the tools to become a really good deck. Inherent crit, consistent rear guards, sometimes draw power if you build it a certain way, and every now and then a couple advantage engines through Battle Razors, Boomerang Throwers, and of course Kiaras. So why is this deck not tier 1? Because a deck like MLB that does everything Perfect Razor does, but also has Retire, exists. So it's not necessarily being gatekeepered from tier 1, but the fact that MLB exists kind of invalidates any reason to play Perfect Razor, which is why it falls under Fringe. That's a good example of one that I'll get to in just a bit. Next up, we have tier 2 and tier 3. This basically speaks to the less popular and less powerful decks. That in no way means that these decks are bad and it's impossible to win with them. It just means that more often than not, it's easier / more consistent to win with the other decks, and that's really the only reason why these clans are down here. In the future, if these clans or decks were to get more support, I could definitely see them rising in the tiers, no questions asked. Alright, now that I got all that stuff out the way, let's go ahead and hop into our first deck here, Pale Moon. Originally, I've always put Pale Moon as sort of like a tier 2 deck because in my opinion, it's a very consistent multi-attack deck, which is a very powerful and pressuring way to win a game, especially in such a fast-paced game like Vanguard Zero. However, with the inclusion of Limit Break and the fact that this deck doesn't really want to play crits at all, kind of hurts its ability and viability within the meta, so I feel like not only has it become less popular because other better decks have come out, but also those decks make it a lot weaker because its overall strategy is being hindered from them. So I'm sadly gonna have to put Pale Moon in tier 3. Now, this definitely changes when Lukia comes out next month, so don't worry, you Pale Moon stans, your time is coming. Next up is Chief Nurse Samshield, which represents Angel Feather. There's 2 builds of Angel Feather right now, and frankly, I talked about both of them in my Angel Feather deck profile and gameplay video, how I view them kind of the same, but the more consistent one being Shamseal. So this represents both Angel Feather decks, Ergodial and just generic Angel Feather good stuff, but generally they both perform and are as popular as one another, so I'm going to go ahead and put this at tier 2. The reason why it's tier 2 is despite being not as powerful as any other decks in tier 3 or tier 1.5, Angel Feather is still really popular, which is why I think tier 2 is a justifiable place to put it. Next up, I'm going to group all the Novas together. Where did I put Perfect Razor? So I already discussed the Perfect Razor's tier 1.5 because of MLB not being like a gatekeeper, but kind of being like an invalidator of Perfect Razor. Next up is Stern Blaukluger. Stern Blaukluger to me will always be tier 2 because this deck is just so wild sometimes. You can just move it out of nowhere, and that really is attractive to people. Plus, it is the best budget deck most of the time for people just starting the game. So a lot of newer players or people that are free to play will play this deck, and that's what makes it like more popular. And of course, it literally can beat anything given if it's lucky enough. So it's on tier 2. And then next up, this is a weird, confusing opinion that I don't know why people think I have, but I literally express it all the time. Pure Beast Deities, or even Beast Deity Razors, which is what Azure Dragon here represents, is actually better than Perfect Razor in my opinion, because a card like Azure Dragon can push when your opponent's at 4 more effectively than Perfect Razor can, because you can actually get your opponent into a game-winning scenario for yourself, because Beast Deity Azure Dragon can essentially restand 2 attackers. After you hit them to 5 damage, you can now push for 2 more attacks, thus they need 2 PGs instead of 1 during the same turn. Also, the pure Beast Deity deck that I profiled on my channel earlier last month had a really amazing advantage engine and sort of control-y anti-meta archetype against decks like MLB and Dote, which are still highly prevalent in this meta. So while Beast Deities isn't necessarily tier 1.5 based on popularity because no one's really playing it, I personally believe that through my own personal testing, it is one of the most powerful decks in this format in terms of countering the most popular decks of MLB, Dote, and even Shadows to an extent. People, I'm telling you, put more respect and more faith into Beast Deity Azure Dragon. Do not sleep on him. Next up is going to be, I'll do the Kagros together as well. We got Good Stuff Kagero coming in at tier 3, and we have, of course, my main man Dote coming in at tier 1. So first things first, Good Stuff Kagero. With the arrival of Gold Paladin, Good Stuff Kagero now becomes just truly bad, because the minute you fight against a Gold Paladin player, your entire strategy of retiring to gain advantage against your opponent to try and grind out a game using cards like Dual Axe, Waterfall, and Blockade just goes out the water, because they can infinitely recall their board, and because you're like an aggressive Kagero deck, you can't really control them for damage, because then you're not really using Blockade effectively, so you're just gonna lose the game. So a deck like Gold Paladin invalidates Good Stuff Kagero, and because, you know, Dote exists, there's really no reason to play Good Stuff Kagero anymore, but it is still a deck, and it has really strong plays against other things, but just the arrival of Gold Paladins and the popularity of Dote just kind of make it to where there's just better things to play in Kagero, so no one's really using it. And then, of course, you have Dote, the best Kagero deck right now, arguably the best advantage deck in the game still, despite the release of cards like Angel Feather and Great Nature. What Dote lacks in the pressure department, it makes up for in the ability to always have a chance. A deck that always has a chance in any game it plays is really appealing to high-level players, so a lot of just really good players of Vanguard and Vanguard Zero love playing Dote, myself included, and there are some fun, like, wacky, aggressive, all-crit builds of Dote that are more aggressive and can definitely steal games a lot of the time on ranked. I feel those lists are a bit greedy and not as good as the overall consistent version of Dote. I said this before, I'll say it again. And I feel like Dote's very adaptable, and with cards like Strike and Contagious, you can really take advantage of the way your opponent is trying to play against you, and in the late game, you can just win out of nowhere sometimes. So Dote is always going to be tier 1 until maybe set 6, to where we get like a better restander in Special Duke Dragon. That will be the only thing I think that will actually push Dote from being tier 1 at this point in time. Moving on, we got the OTT decks, it looks like. We got Scarlet Witch Coco, and what I put, okay, so there's Tsukuyomi. So Scarlet Witch Coco is coming in at tier 2. I think it's a little bit better than Stern Blackluger because it actually has a strategy outside of just getting a little bit lucky, and it's also an OTT deck, so of course it has access to Silent Tom, which is like a guaranteed win condition, and while Blackluger is strong, it is not a guaranteed win condition, so that's why it's tier 2. The reason why Coco is tier 2 and not necessarily tier 1.5 is because a deck like Tsukuyomi is what is tier 1.5, and it's actually going to be more popular than Coco. Also, I would say Tsukuyomi, in terms of just matchup, is better than Nova, so that's why it's in front of them. Like, it's hard for Azure Dragon to beat Tsukuyomi. It's hard for Perfect Razor to beat Tsukuyomi, so that's why this is here. Also, Tsukuyomi has all the same things going for it: guaranteed win condition and Tom, the nice ability to play cards like Gentle Jim to help fix your columns in the late game against cross-right decks, so you can still hold up against Dote and MLB respectively, and of course, the ability to sort of always have a chance given how much you dig and your stack capabilities. You can always add those PGs to your hand when you need them, or even get cheeky little 6 or 7 damage heals. When a good pilot is piloting Tsukuyomi, it feels like you're unbeatable, and frankly, I feel like Tsukuyomi is always going to be a deck that's around until maybe Battle Sisters come out, and even when Battle Sisters do come out, I feel like Tsukuyomi will still find a way to surpass it in popularity in terms of the meta, but they'll both have like different reasons why they're good, instead of just like being, oh, this is Tsukuyomi stuff doing Tsukuyomi things. It'll be like OGT, which way do you want to play, right? So tier 1.5 Tsukuyomi makes sense. Next, we have a new arrival, which isn't coming until later this month, but I figured I'd talk about it now because given what I know about the deck and given its experience in the JP meta, I feel like I can pretty safely assume where it's going to land in the tiers, especially given how popular spikes have been since the last release. I think the Limit Break Spike Brothers support, specifically Dudley Emperor, becomes tier 1 on release. No questions asked. I would actually argue it's better than Dote in terms of popularity. I don't think it's stronger than Dote. I definitely think they're both pretty even against each other, but given how easy it is going to be for some of us to get a hold of this deck, given that newer players can just like pick this up and start using Dudleys like right away pretty much, I think this deck will become more popular, and for some reason, Spikes in America or the global server was way more popular, I think, than it was in the other server for JP, and I have no idea why, but that will just transfer into more popularity here as well for Dudleys, and this deck is really, really strong. Do you guys remember how strong Spikes was on release? Well, picture that, but now you have an ability to beat cross rides, you have a guaranteed heal that goes back into your deck before you attack, and you still have cards like Juggernaut Maximum, Skydiver, and of course, the Dudley engine of just being able to superior call 2 cards out of nowhere. This deck is going to be the pinnacle of multi-attack, and it's going to be a super aggressive but also somehow consistent deck. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of waves this deck makes, but I'm also really excited to see just sort of the like crazy amount of people that'll play it day 1. You know, people who want to play this deck are going to play it day 1, and they're not going to stop until Break Ride comes out, and then when Break Ride comes out, they'll have Ben and Dragger, so we'll have a whole other problem to deal with. Next up, we got Gold Paladin, and you'll notice that all I have here for Gold Paladin is Ezel. I know there's 2 lists you know, super aggressive wombo combo Ezel and Peli Ezel, or like hybrid Ezel, Gold Paladin, good stuff, whatever you want to say. I know those are two different decks. However, they are both Gold Paladins and they both play Ezels, and I feel like at the end of the day, the play styles of the two decks aren't really that different, and playing a certain one over the other one really only matters tournament by tournament. It doesn't matter in like a general sense, because I feel like you're equally likely to play against one or the other, so there's no reason to assume that they're different decks that you can fight. So that's my current opinion on Gold Paladin. I think they both have equal levels of power as well, so that just like adds to like the ability to kind of group them together as one deck. And I feel like this deck, Gold Paladins, is tier 1. However, it is the least popular deck in tier 1. It'll be the bottom of tier 1, and the reason for this is that whichever build you're talking about, high roll or not, they both lack one important thing. When your opponent has 2 intercepts, it's kind of difficult sometimes to deal damage. You have to do like really finangly, out of nowhere plays, like unboosted swing at rear guard, boosted swing Vanguard at a rear guard, and then swing with a Vivian, hit, get the counter blast, and then call a card. If your opponent's at 4 damage and they have 1 PG, they're still not going to die if you do that. And if they're at 5 damage and have a PG, they're not dying when you do that. So being able to like go for game, if your opponent has like enough intercepts, is still hard for Ezel, and it probably always will be until cards like Spectre come out, or until Set A comes out and we get cards like Blaster Blade and Blaster Dark Spirit. So that way we can have removal against our opponent. The only thing this deck really is lacking right now. But despite that, a lot of people are still playing it because it is that aggressive and is that powerful and is super consistent. So it's a good deck, it just is lacking something to become the best deck. I'm just going to go ahead and get these two out the way really quick. Galahad and Garmor, both tier 3, not because they're bad decks, but because the other Royal Paladin deck, MLB, is literally the best deck in the game. And until we get some kind of nerf or ban or whatever they got to do, this deck will still be relevant no matter what. I think we'll get the nerf for it next month when set 6 drops. However, I do not think that that will be enough to sort of keep it away from tier 1. It might lower its popularity a bit, but it definitely will not keep it from being played, and it definitely does not ruin the power of this deck. This deck, with how many times you play against it and just how inherently strong it is, especially against other Limit Break decks, is just so devastating. This deck will always be tier 1, no questions asked. Alright, that's enough of the probably most hated deck in the game. Let's go ahead and talk about one of the most loved decks in the game, Great Nature. Personally, my favorite deck right now to play in Limit Break format, and boy oh boy, do I want to say this deck is tier 1, because in my mind it is. However, I think given popularity, I have to say it's tier 1.5, but I will give it the top of tier 1.5, and I'll tell you why. Because this deck, like other decks right now, is just missing one thing. It's just missing one thing before it becomes tier 1, and that is a guaranteed multi-attack. Once Polaris comes out and we get that ability to have late game and mid game aggression out of nowhere guaranteed, mwah, it's gonna be so delicious, and definitely tier 1. But right now, all we really have is the occasional stand trigger / the occasional hit with Kangaroo that is nice and does lead to us winning games, but it is not the most consistent thing in the world, like on swing, counterblast, restand. So until we get Polaris, I feel like this deck will be a permanent tier 1.5. No matter how good you are with it, no matter how much you commit to using it, it will still be sort of gatekeepered by its lack of inherent aggression. It will have inherent advantage, inherent power gain, and inherent consistency, but it will not have inherent aggression. Until we get automatic aggression out of nowhere that we can consistently use to overpower and pressure our opponent, this deck will remain tier 1.5. But trust me guys, Great Nature is similar to Gold Paladin, just right there from being one of the best decks in the game. So don't worry, our time will come. Next up, we have the latest clan event set, Grand Blue, giving us Cocytus and Thanatos. While these cards do add a lot to the archetype and make it more viable, the power creep of Limit Break sadly does sort of overshadow Cocytus' strength. The deck still does what it does. It gets, you know, consistent columns, it gets consistent intercepts, it gets power now thanks to Cocytus, and it even gets multi-attack thanks to Thanatos. But because the deck isn't really designed to support multi-attack, it's designed to support like general consistency, like superior riding, power gain, and calling from the drop zone, cards like Thanatos, while they are nice, don't exactly work given the mechanics of Vanguard Zero. It's more of a nice way to sort of kill your opponent at the very end of the game, and even then, you're probably dead by then because you're fighting against MLB. So, while I do love Kakaitis, personally one of my favorite Grand Blue units, I feel like he sadly isn't enough to push the deck out of, you know, tier 2, tier 3 territory. For now, I'm going to give it tier 2, like bottom of tier 2, because again, it's like the least powerful of all these because it A, relies on limit break, B, relies on cards being in the drop zone, C, has terrible matchups against certain things in tier 1 and tier 1.5, and even tier 2. like this deck cannot beat Angel Feather. Like, let's be real, it just cannot beat Angel Feather in any sense of the word. So I really just think that until we get Break Ride, this deck isn't going to be coming out of tier 2 anytime soon. However, I think there's enough popularity and enough people behind it and standing it that it qualifies for tier 2. Next up, we have a contender for probably the best deck besides MLB in Cardfight Vanguard right now, and that's Narukami, Vermillion specifically. Definitely tier 1, 100%. It's so aggressive, it's great on ranked, and it actually has a really good matchup against MLB, against decks like Gold Paladin, against decks like Tsukuyomi. Like, it's actually a really good check to this format because it is so inherently aggressive and inherently pressuring, and has like a little bit of advantage in it too because it does retire cards, which is super nice. If you wanted to call a certain deck a gatekeeper in this format, I wouldn't say it's MLB. MLB is the ruler of the format. He's not the gatekeeper. A deck like Vermillion is the gatekeeper because he's the reason why other decks that aren't necessarily supposed to be good just are actually terrible. Like a deck like, you know, Garmor cannot beat Vermillion. A deck like Galahad, I don't even know what it tries to do. A deck like Blockade basically is what Vermillion is, just worse. And a deck like Pale Moon, again, cannot deal with the aggression. So I feel like Vermillion is the ultimate gatekeeper in this format right now that also has a really good MLB matchup. Sure, it lacks, you know, card draw and advantage and like defense, but so do a lot of decks in the top right here. Like a deck like Dudley, besides Mega Trainer, has no way to, you know, gain PGs. A deck like Gold Paladins and MLB literally do not have a way to get PGs to their hand, but yet somehow just don't die sometimes, you know. Like in this format right now, I've said it before and I'll say it again, the best decks are defined by what's the most aggressive, and moreover, what's the most consistently aggressive. In a deck like Narukami, the second it gets Limit Break, doesn't need anything else just to go, okay, 3 damage every single turn until you run out of PGs. So I really like the deck, I really like the placement it's in, I like kind of the tools it has, you know, cards like Rising Phoenix, the Shidens, Death Scythe, Stormy. Oh my god, Stormy is such a powerful card. Oh my god. Like, this deck is definitely tier 1. We got Neo Nectar. I view this deck pretty much the same way I did in set 4 meta. It's good, it's consistent, it's pressuring, but it's just not popular enough to where it actually matters. I feel like this deck actually has a lot of good things going for it. It has multi-attack, it has consistency, it has the ability to like put heals back. It's really nice, but I don't think it's nice enough to the point where it can actually contend with anything in the top 2 tiers here. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it sort of in the middle of tier 2. I'm not necessarily saying that it's better than any of the decks in tier 2. I'm just saying I feel like given how popular it is, I feel like the middle of tier 2 makes more sense. If it was more popular, I'd put it at the top probably. I just haven't seen it enough on the rank ladder or in tournaments to say that it's the top of tier 2. Next up, we have some more tier 3 decks. We got NLK, we got Bermuda, and we got Dimension Police. These 3 decks, until we get more support for them, just like these 2 things kind of just do what MLB and don't do, just worse. And then Bermuda, like even though I lose to Bermuda all the freaking time, and there are some really cool plays the deck can make, I just do not see it performing well for anyone until we get Coral support. So just trust me when I say that as much as I like hate the deck in terms of playing against it and stuff, I promise you I'm being very objective here when I say I truly don't think it has a consistent way to beat all these decks up here. And finally, we have Shadow Paladins. Now, this deck definitely is confusing to people because I hear people say all the time, oh, Shadow Paladins suck right now, or until we get cards like Crone Jailer and Spec Duke, there's no reason to play Shadows. And I'm just like, whoa, guys. This deck is great still. Shadows is still the toolbox deck of the format, you know? No deck in the game has retire, crit gain, draw advantage, pressure. Like, until we get Special Duke, this deck will do literally every effect in the game except for restanding. So I truly believe that given the amount of options this deck has, that it hasn't really lost any power. The only thing it's lost is its popularity. That is the real judgment here as to why you're not seeing it, because people would rather play other things. But again, as I've said all video, that does not mean a deck is any worse. So while I put in my last tier list that this deck was tier 1 given how strong it was, I think given moreover now that it's less popular, that now it moves down to tier 1.5. In fact, I would venture to say that it is the top of tier 1.5. The only reason why I'm putting Duckbill higher is because personal preference. I like playing Great Nature more than I like playing PBO, but I definitely think that these two could interchange no problem. That is it for my tier list, you guys. I do recommend that if any of the decks that you like to play are on the lower tiers, do not be discouraged. Still play the decks you love to play. Who knows, you might be the exception to this rule that I'm giving you. If you're confident and you know that you can beat any of the tier 1 decks or any of the tier 1.5 decks, by all means, justifiably play whatever you want. Vanguard is a game that allows you to succeed no matter what deck you play, as long as you know what you're doing. If you just play smart and have a matchup idea in your mind of what you're supposed to do in order to win, and you do it, chances are you might win, because that's the way it should work, right? Do not let my opinions discourage you from doing what you want. But anyways, you guys, that'll be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys did enjoy, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel and click that bell for notifications so that way you guys know when my videos go live for you. If you guys want to continue the conversation as to what the best decks are in Vanguard Zero, I do go live every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday over on Twitch. Link to that down below. I do a lot of things in just chatting, and I definitely play a lot of Vanguard Zero. So if you ever want to talk about Vanguard or the best decks or honestly whatever, feel free to come over there and hopefully we can have a fun conversation. And as always, you guys, I've been your Truechampionsteven. Please be sure to work hard, rest easy, and live well, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.